There's a word from the Vilna Gaon, very beautiful word. I mean, from the Chofetz Chaim, based on the Vilna Gaon. The first mission, the third chapter. Akavi b'mahalel omer histakel b'shloshet dvorim ve'ein atobol lidei aveiro. If you reflect on three things, you will never sin. He doesn't say habeit. You should gaze. Histakel. Histakel means reflection. Reflect on three things. I've been speaking to somebody recently, and I explained to him, we believe in many things and we value many things. But to be ingrained in the person, it becomes a sense of yours, you need tremendous reflection. Unless it comes natural to you, it's something external and you have to somehow integrate it into your psyche. It's not easy. You have to continuously reflect and think about it. It takes tremendous amount of reflection. If you reflect long enough, then you begin internalizing what you're reflecting on. So what he's telling you here, it's not you should know. If you consider these three things, your life will be a different life. Doesn't mean that. Reflect. There's a story that there was once a conference in
So
there was a conference at Warsaw of Rosh Hashivas and great Rabbonim. And who attended the conference was Rabbi Salanter and the Chofetz Chaim. And they were in the same inn, and the rooms were adjoining they were next to one another. And the walls weren't very thick. And you realize Rabbi Salanter was a great tzaddik. He was a great disseminator of Torah. He was considered the ultimate pillar of Torah. And the Chofetz Chaim, even in his time, besides being a great Torah sage, he was known as a chassid. Not that he wore Hasidic garbs. He was chassid. He was a very holy man. And neither of them slept very much. But somebody has to silence their whatever it is. I think Chaim, you have noise in the background. You have to silence what you have.
So do you, Norman. You need to mute your computer.
thank you, Bob. Mine was silence.
Okay. So the Chofetz Chaim is able to hear through the wall. And Rabbi Salanter, he hears him pacing all night pacing. What is he pacing? And when he paces, he gets himself into a certain rhythm, and he's quoting a pasuk. He must have quoted the pasuk 1,000 times as he paces back and forth. What pasuk did he quote? Ivdu Hashem b'simcha v'gilu b'roda. Serve God with joy, and you should be in glee with trepidation. This is the pasuk he quoted. And all night he was repeating it over and over and over. And as he repeated, he paced to absorb it. Rabbi Salanter was a holy man. He had an easy absorption of anything that had to do with spirituality, with the Kedusha. But even him, he had to reflect on it. Not only reflect, he had to verbalize it. And through the reflection and just the single-mindedness of meditating on this pasuk, only then was he affected. If the Shem b'sipla gilu b'roda, you reflect on these three things, you're not going to come to sin. What's reflection? You think about it for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. You have to think about it continuously. It becomes part of your psyche. When we speak about humility, what is humility? Person's humble. Humble means that even if he realizes, he understands, he knows more than most. He's more qualified than more than most. But it doesn't make a difference because that's what he's supposed to be. There's no therefore. If there's a therefore, then we talk about ego inflation. But if you say, I am who I'm supposed to be, there's nothing, I don't pride myself. I'm doing exactly what I'm doing and am who I'm supposed to be. That person has humility. Although the person knows, because his whole state of mind is, whatever I am because I am, because that's what I'm supposed to be. So he's always in a state of humility. It's not that he has to think to be humble. Of course, everyone has certain challenges. Do you reveal certain things about yourself? You don't. If you consider these three things, you'll never cross the line. I'll give you an example. This week, we read the Parsha Dvarim that when Yisro had given the advice to Moshe, he should set up a judicial system and he should adjudicate all the cases. He gave certain criteria. They have to have certain qualifications, the judges. They have to be chachomim. They have to be wise. They have to be doing. They have to be known to their fellow Jews. What's chachomim? So Rashi cites an interpretation that they have shame. They have conscience. A chacham has conscience. That's chachomim. A person who has no conscience, and you're brilliant and you have a mind, you could turn the world upside down, cross lines, because you feel you're superior, and there's nothing you can't justify. The only a chacham who's truly wise, that means he's going to utilize his wisdom appropriately and not embezzle it and use it for other purposes other than truth. He has to be humble. He has to have shame. What's shame? It's conscience. A person has conscience because he has conscience. He can't do many things that other people could do. He can't cross lines. Jack, I'm in a class. I'll have to call you back. Okay, no problem. Take care. So what I'm saying is, a person with conscience, we know that Jews cannot behave the way the Arabs behaved on October 7th. They can't behave that way. Because since Jews have innate characteristics, Rachmanim, Baishanim, Govim, Chasodim, this is innate to the character of every Jew. Mercy, conscience, and doing acts of chesed. Because we descend from the Avos HaKadoshim, from the holy patriarchs. We can't behave like barbarians, like predator animals, without conscience. Can't, it's not possible. You may find a Jew may behave that way. The Gemara says if he behaves that way, you have to question his pedigree. He's not an original Jew. Therefore, that characteristic comes from somewhere else. Even the Shvatim, when Pinchas killed Zimri, the way he killed him, what did they say? Why did he do what he did? Why was he able to do what he did? Because he comes from his grandfather was Yisro, who was originally a pagan who fattened calves for idolatry. He could do, couldn't do what he did. We couldn't take a spear and pierce two people the way he did with that level of vengeance. We couldn't do it because we're more refined. It's not within our character. He could do it. That's originally what they said. And they realized, no, he's the grandson of our own, whole different. But again, they said he did he could do what we can do. We can't do that. We're not talking about conscientious objector. People didn't want to go to the war because they can't see themselves killing people. It has nothing to do with this. There's innate in the person's character. You can't. Gentiles, they can do this because that's not part of their emotional, spiritual profile. Therefore, they could. So anything which is not part of our natural makeup and we want to internalize it takes tremendous amount of reflection and repetition and mentoring and creating a perception without distraction. That's what it works. Rav Kalatsky used to say, famous word, what is the shortest distance in existence? But it's the most difficult thing to cross that distance from the brain to the heart. No, we have Norman's a cardiologist, even though it's unrelated, the brain to the heart. But he did he did neurology, Norman's. He has the brain and the heart. How close are they to one another? Very close. But to get what you understand in the brain into the heart, into your emotion, it's more distant than going from one end of the world to the other. Rav Kalatsky used to say, it's easier to study Talmud in its entirety, in depth, than change one characteristic in your being. Person is not giving, naturally giving. It's not part of his makeup. To become naturally giving, it's easier to study Talmud in depth, in its entirety, than change that characteristic. It's not just part of your makeup. So how do you take something which is external and internalize it? It becomes part of your function, it becomes part of your consciousness. It's delving, reflecting, unceasingly to that. David says, he always had a sense of God's presence wherever he was. We all believe in God. We believe God wills everything. God is aware of everything. Well, in our daily experience throughout the day, how often do we think about God? David didn't have to think about God. If God's before his face and in his emotion, God was part and parcel of his life. If every nuance of his behavior had to meet a certain standard, the standard was God has to approve at the most advanced level. Otherwise, it's not acceptable. That's Shvi Seshem Negdishomit. That means he's not going to sin at all. That means even though Shlomo says there's no perfect tzaddik. But if you consider these things, he says, you will not come to sin at all. Istaker, reflection. Got to reflect. So let's talk about what are they. My ayin boso. Where do you come? Where do we all come from? Time of conception. Bitipa srucha. Firstly, how many of us have ever thought of our original origin? No. We know our father was our mother. We know there's conception, and there's gestation in the womb of the mother, then there's birth. But do you think about the moment of the conception, through how did that conception come about? What was it? Tipa srucha, a putrid droplet of semen. Today we were learning about Zorah. If you have an image of a king and he's holding a vessel filled with human feces, what does that mean? What does that represent? Is that an image that's worshipped? Because that means he's all powerful. He considers the world has no greater value than a pot of feces. That's how powerful he is. Well, no, the people feel the king has no greater value than that. So therefore, the image is not idolatrous. That's the question of tomorrow. He's like a pot of feces, whatever they think about it. Any Holocaust survivor, when he thought about Hitler, Yimach Shemot Zichro, tasting the evil and the cruelty of the Nazis and Shmom. The mention of his name immediately evokes in his mind a level of cruelty which is demonic. It's demonic cruelty. When we say Hitler, Yamach Shmo V'Zichro, we know he's a murderer, he should be cursed, he should, whatever. The visualization is not the same visualization, because these people experienced it. They saw it. They can't get it out of their mind, out of their emotion. That's what it is. So people are under the king's rule, and he was cruel and heartless, and he was a real despot. And they want to memorialize him. What do they memorialize him? He's holding a pot of feces. That's who he is. That's what he is. Because they experienced that. Where do we come from? Not semen. We know semen fertilizes the ovum. It's putrid semen. Putrid. Putrid is something which is negative. It's almost has no value in its own right. No value. That's where you come from. Could you imagine a person, you put a chip in his brain, and it's artificial intelligence. He has a 60 IQ. And when you put that chip in his brain, he has an 800 IQ. But nobody knows that he knows it. And he walks around like he's King Tut. He is the genius of geniuses, but he knows he's a chip. Could this man feel superior? How do you feel superior? You got a chip in your brain. You take the chip out at 60 IQ. Could he feel, unless he's totally has no conscience? He's pulling the wool over everybody else's eye. But knowing the truth, could he boast that he has the capacity to do things other people can't have? No, it has nothing to do with you. It has to do with the chip. You put that chip in their brain, they'll be no less smart than he is. Where do you come from? But today I'm this. But you're that, but where do you come from? It's interesting. There's a difference between Jews and non-Jews. Jews, they pride themselves in their pedigree, what we call yichus. Who do I come from? I'm from David HaMelech. I'm from the Davidic line. I come from the Vilna Gaon. I come from the Rambam. Jew prides himself in that. But let's say a person came from the antithesis of what these people were, and you became a Baal Tshuva. You're ashamed to talk about your background. It's disgraceful that you had any relevance to that. You don't want it to be said or to be told. And therefore the halacha is that if you share with somebody the person is a ger, is a convert, without his permission, it's something you're not permitted to say. Because it's not something he prides himself that he originally wasn't a Jew. It falls under the rubric of Lashon Hara. That's confidentiality, because it's something which will affect him negatively. What do you mean? You were 0, you became 1 million, comparatively speaking. By the Goyim, by the non-Jews. My great-great-grandfather, he was sent from England. He was a penal colony in Georgia. I'm a descendant of that penal colony, from that inmate in the penal colony in Georgia, who he sent off to Australia. My grandfather, he was on the barge. They shipped him from one penal colony to another, Australia to Georgia. Goyim, they pride themselves. Because I'm a self-made man. It's me. Everything's the me and the I. So the more you show that you come from 0, the more you pride yourself. The Jews the other way. This whole concept of boasting and priding, it's not a positive quality among Jews. It's negative. Even a person would call a Baal Gaiva. Nobody prides himself that he's a Baal Gaiva. He says, I'm not a Baal Gaiva. That's who I am. He doesn't even understand it. He says, if you ask anybody a smart aim, just ask me, I'll tell you. He doesn't see it as a negative. Not a Baal Gaiva. But that's Baal Gaiva. He's arrogant because he feels that there's nothing which he can't do, that he can't justify. Because he's better than most and all. That's what he feels. Where do you come from? So why do we take liberties in life to do as we choose. You know, I make $1 million salary. I live in a mansion. I have so many employees. I dictate to them. But where do you come from? You come from that putrid droplet of semen. That's how this so-called what you look like comes from that. You know, please keep it quiet. Person has plastic surgery before, you couldn't look at him. That's how grotesque he looked. He got himself a plastic surgeon. Now he wants to date a woman. And she says, did you have plastic surgery? Because when we have children, I don't want them to look ugly. He says, I never had plastic surgery. Only when the child's born, then you know what he looked like. Because then his game is up. Because everything comes to the surface. Where do you come from? Where you come from is where you're going. As we can discuss. Lamokam Rima Vitolea, where the worms and the maggots are. You go from that to that. There's an interim. You're on top of the wave. You ride the wave, what happens eventually? The wave crashes. And when the wave crashes, you crash with the wave. Person is a balgaiva. He's soaring. What happens when he has a heart attack? What happens when he has a financial reversal? He's off the wave. The wave crashes. And when the wave crashes, he crashes with the wave. And that's what life is all about. If there doesn't crash in his life, he'll crash at the end of his life. Because nobody is immune from death. And ultimately, the more you're less spiritual, the worms and maggots have a greater feast. We read Pirkei Avos, Marbe Bos Marbe Rima. The more meat you have, the more flesh you have, the more worms. The more the worms have to eat.
Well, I say it's amazing how the Mishnah is bringing together, trying to teach us two things which are very much a part of it, which is the spiritual level, bifnei mi ata omed, and the physical aspect, which is tipa srucha. And I understand that when the Gaon, a big person in Torah, is comparing this, but for chinuch purposes, but
Okay.
it is not a...
Let's go. We're talking about you have an adult. He believes in God. He believes in reward and punishment. He believes in all this, like we do. You believe in the 13 tenets of Jewish belief, the 13 animam. We believe in it. Schar v'omesh. And we believe in God. We believe in the authenticity of the Torah. We believe in all. If you believe in schar v'onesh, which is a reality, that ultimately there's an accountability, and there'll be a day of reckoning. And we believe that punishment in the world to come is endlessly more devastating than anything that exists in the physical existence. And reward is the ultimate. There's nothing that compares. So if that's the case, how does one even have the consideration or the audacity to cross the line and to sin? Do you realize what's coming down the pike? And how do you pass on an opportunity that whenever you can succeed in this life, it's less than a pittance compared to that? So why are we motivated? Well, we're not. And there's no stopgap. You go straight across that line. Why? But we believe it. You know why? Because if it's not part of your conscience, you can cross that line and you're not motivated to do many things that you should do. Because you didn't internalize it. We believe things, but it's all abstract. Many things in our lives are abstract. It's outside of us. But if I tell you to put your hand in the fire, and you know fire burns, there's no way you're putting your hand in that fire, unless I force your hand in the fire. Because one is reality, it's not just abstract. Of course, because you understand fire burns, but that it burns is not abstract, it's your reality. Abstract, you believe reward and punishment. You believe in God. You believe in there's going to be a day of reckoning. But that's all abstract. A person's not going to steal understanding. There's a sign in a store, shoplifters will be prosecutors. There's cameras going. Anybody in his right mind who's in touch with reality is not going to shoplift, even if he's attempting to do it, because he's definitely getting caught and he's going to be prosecuted for it, because that's reality. Later, there's Ayin Roa, there's a Sinai, there's Ozen Shamas, everything's recorded. Knowing that, we cross lines, we do many things. How? Why? The answer is it's all abstract. The only way we function best is it's a reality in our lives. We sense it with our senses. If you sense it with your sense, it's like telling you put your hand in the fire. You're not putting it in the fire. Many years ago, there was two sisters. They were both doctors. Norman knows them. Not going to mention names. And they both were observant. And the youngest sister, she became engaged. And the engagement party was at Greener Pastures. There was a vegetarian restaurant right off Park Avenue. Norman, I don't know if you remember it. It was on 61st between Park and Lexington. Yes, Sandy, she'll give you the address. I'm not sure if it's still there. Okay. So this
Rav Kalatsky, my mother just said she remembers it. It was next to Bloomingdale's.
Right, not far from me. No, they didn't want to accept your father's credit card there. They said he hit his maximum. Okay. Terrific. So what happened was these two sisters, everybody in the family, all the cousins were all doctors. And the one cousin, he was a famous psychiatrist. His name was Dr. Sanger. And there's a Sanger clinic, could be it exists today too. It was a psychiatric clinic. And he was the expert. And the great aunt, the mother of the Sanger, was there. And she's proud. Yeah, here she has all her nephews and nieces, all doctors, and she's proud. Her son is the greatest of all of them. And she comes over to me, she says, Rabbi, you know, my daughters, my nieces, they used to eat in my house. They become so observant, they don't eat in my house anymore. Could you explain it to me? So it's not exactly kosher, but is it so terrible if they don't eat kosher? What's so terrible? So I said to her, I said, Mrs. Sanger, you're proud of all your nephews and nieces. Your son, one of your nephews is a cardiac surgeon. And you say to him, could you explain to me why when you operate on the person's heart, you go through the chest, why don't you go through the back? So your nephew will explain to you because you understand the way, if you want to succeed and save the person's life, there's a procedure. You follow the procedure, the person has a chance to survive. You don't follow the procedure, he doesn't have a chance to survive. Within our spiritual makeup, there's certain procedures, there's certain protocols. You follow the protocol, you function spiritually as a Jew. If not, that's the answer. So I said, I want to ask you a question, Ms. Sanger. I said, do you eat on Yom Kippur? She says, God forbid. She's not an observant woman. She doesn't observe dietary rules. I said, you don't eat? If somebody would give me food to eat, it would not go down past my gullet. I would choke on the food. I'm so conditioned not to eat Yom Kippur. I've never, and this is a woman already in her upper 70s. I've never in my life ever eaten on Yom Kippur. So what does that say? When it comes to dietary laws, that's something that's abstract. But not eating Yom Kippur is so ingrained in her, it's a reality. That's not abstract observance. That's her reality. Therefore, there's no way she could eat on Yom Kippur. She will never cross that line. So you have to bring about a level of conditioning that what we believe by reflecting and actualizing many, many times, it becomes part of your psyche, it becomes part of your routine, it becomes part of your essence. And only then you will not sin because you're not going to cross that line. Like this woman says, if she eat on Yom Kippur, she would choke on the food. So if the reality is you believe there's a day of reckoning, you're going to stand before the King of Kings. Who are you going to give her? And there's accountability in every nuance of your life. Nothing goes unseen. So if you take all this into account and you internalize it all, you're not going to sin. It's like telling you to put your hand in the fire. Not because you understand what fire does. Because it becomes a reality. If this becomes your reality, whether it's spiritual or physical, it doesn't make a difference. That's your reality. You'll be stopped in your tracks. You wouldn't even consider crossing those lines.